Chapter 16. Fever. Taking the money from the bank was like having a rooted tooth yanked from her jaw. Then, the most painful part past, she pressed $2 whole into Mrs. Bedloe's hand before going out on the town to buy Rachel's shoes and shawl and to order a dress made for her. Having spent that much, Lyddie squandered 50 pence more to get the child a beginning reader and a small paper volume of verses that the bookseller recommended. All told, Lyddie had spent more than 2 weeks' wages. There was less than $1 in her pocket now left from the princely sum she had withdrawn. She tried not to think on it. It was for Rachel, wasn't it? How could she begrudge the child? The very next day, Bridget was slower than ever, and it was all that Lyddie could do to keep from screaming. Time after time she took the shuttle from the girl's clumsy hands, sucked the thread through from the bobbin, and threw it into the race, raging that a machine should stand idle for even a few seconds. Bridget was on the brink of tears all day. At last Lyddie exploded when once again the girl's inattention caused a snarl and ruined a piece. "You must mind, girl!" she shouted. "Forget everything else but the loom." "But I canna forget," Bridget cried out. "Me mother's sick unto death, and no money for a doctor." "Here!" She snatched all the change from her apron pocket and stuffed it into Bridget's. "Here, that's for the doctor. Now mind the machine, eh?" The next few days went better than those before. She coaxed a few words from Rachel, and the suggestion of a smile when she read aloud from the book of verses. Dr. Foster went to Gloucester in a shower of rain. He stepped in a puddle right up to his middle and never went there again. "Well," said Lyddie, "that's mud season in Vermont, eh?" And Rachel smiled. Encouraged, Lyddie tried to make a rhyme for Rachel herself. Uncle Judah went to Bermuda in the April rain. He sunk in the ooze right up to his snooze and never was heard of again. This time, there was no mistaking the smile. Work was going better as well. Bridget was pathetically grateful for her gift. She beat Lyddie to work in the morning and had 2 of the machines oiled and gleaming before Lyddie even entered the room. Mr. Marsden was very pleased. By Thursday, he smiled across the room continually. Lyddie resolved not to glance his way, but she could see without looking the little rosebud mouth fixed in its prissy bow. Bow, bow, bow. How hot the room seemed. Of course it was always hot and steamy, but somehow, perhaps if she hadn't been burning up, she could have kept her head. But she was so hot, so exhausted, that Thursday in May. She wasn't prepared. She had no defenses. He stopped her and made her wait until everyone had gone. Just when she felt she must lie down or faint, he stopped her and put both his fat white hands heavily on either sleeve, dragging his weight on her arms. He was saying something as well, but her head was pounding and she couldn't make it out. What did he want with her? She had to go. She had to see Rachel. Her whole body was on fire. She needed a cool cloth for her head, and yet he kept holding on to her. She tried to stare him down, but her eyes were burning in their sockets. "Let me go!" she wanted to cry. She tried to pull back from him, but he clutched tighter. He was bringing his strange little mouth closer and closer to her fiery face. She murmured something about not feeling well, but it made his eyes grow soft and his arm go all around her shoulder. What made her do it? Illness? Desperation? She'd never know. But she raised her booted foot and stomped her heel down with all her might. He gave a cry and, dropping his arms, doubled over. It was all the time she needed. She stumbled down the stairs and across the yard, nearly falling at last into the door of number 5. He had not tried to follow. She did not go to work the next day, or for many days thereafter. Her fever raged, and she was out of her mind with it. Once, she realized that someone was putting a cold cloth on her forehead, and she raised her arm to bring it down over her burning eyelids. A tiny, cool hand rested on her hot one, and stroked it timidly. Somewhere, at a great distance, she heard a small voice croon, "There, there," and then her heavy arm was lifted and put back gently under the quilt. Dr. Morris was summoned. She tried to protest. She couldn't waste money on doctors, but if the words came out at all, they came out too thickly for anyone to understand. The bell rang, but it was far away now. It no longer rang for her. People came in and out of the darkened room. Sometimes Mrs. Bedloe was spooning broth into her, sometimes another of the boarders. Diana was there, and Bridget, though who would have sent for them? Bridget had brought some Irish concoction that Mrs. Bedloe seemed to be trying to refuse, but the girl would not leave until she had been allowed to spoon some of it into the patient's mouth. And always, whenever Lyddie swam up the fiery pool out into consciousness, she knew that Rachel was there beside her. "She'll get sick," Lyddie tried to protest. "Make her go away, or move me to the infirmary. She's too frail." But either she never got the words out, or no one could or would understand, for whenever she was in her right mind, Rachel was there. She woke one morning with a start. The bell was clanging, banging away at her dully aching head. She sat up abruptly. The room swooped and dipped about her. More slowly. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, but when she tried to stand, she fell over like a newborn calf. "Rachel," she called, "help me. I gotta go to work." Rachel raised up from the other bed. "You're awake!" she cried. "Lyddie, you didn't die!" She fell back onto her pillow. "No," she said weakly. "Not yet. We can still hop."